So we spoke a lot about how do you raise and develop a team, and this is graze them. Yeah, they're
I
cattle.
love that. They're grazing like sheep.
They were sheep. Yeah. What specific gifts, talents, or skill sets will be helpful on the team to launch a church in this location? So let's
Well, it comes down to what you were saying earlier on. Depending what type of church you're trying to build, you might need different skill sets. Or many church plants are going to need the same skills and talents ultimately, but you might emphasize them a bit differently in what you need. So for us, when we planted, it was like I could really do with musicians, because I don't want to just be there on my cajon. That is not going to sound too great. So we were very happy when people played instruments. Like, do you play anything? Yes, fantastic. You're in the band. It didn't take long. So we were always looking for musicians. As a lead pastor, I was trying to figure out the things that I'm not so good at. So how can I find people that would complement what I'm good at so that they can be released to do it? But in many ways, I didn't really have the luxury of trying to recruit people from a church. I was just given what the Lord gave me, and I had a high faith in that if whoever the Lord gives me, then I'll use them for the glory of the Lord. And by the time the team had come together, all the gifts were there, and it was like, this is great. It was fantastic. So it depends, like if your two plants would be quite different, for example. So your skills that you might want might be two different things. So it's thinking through who are your target group, what are you trying to get done? So if you're like, I really want to meet you, I really want to hit the youth. Okay, is anybody here that like leading youth? No. But we all like knitting or crochet or sewing. Well, thanks, but we're really needing youth. So I'd be painting that picture right from the off. This is the type of church we're going to be, and try and make sure you get those gifts in there.
Yep.
It's definitely better as well if you can go out with another leader, ideally.
Yeah, that's
Even if it's not another pastor, minimally somebody that you're like, hey, this guy is at least an intern. Yeah, he's developing. It's a better experience.
Yeah. What did we have? I needed people around me who were gifted in operations and administration, who could help. The spiritual gifts are broad, from preaching, teaching, prophesying, all those things, down to, administration and leading with zeal. And so I needed people who could help me kind of administer my gift. So I can lead, I can preach, I can gather a team, I can teach a team, but I'm not very good at organizing or administrating. And so I was blessed and tried to choose guys that I thought had those gifts, and then I invested in them, and then gave them position and gave them influence and authority within the church, because I knew that if we were going to do stuff, we were going to need people who could do it, and I was going to quickly reach the end of my capacities to actually consistently organize that. So that was one that that complemented my talents there. Music, again, I needed music leaders because I can't clap and sing at the same time. I can't sing either.
I'm not even sure you can do one at a time.
No. I can't clap in rhythm, so there you go. So I need a good music team. So you want to look at those things and like, what do we want to do? And then don't be ashamed about praying to the Lord for it. Just, Lord, help, I would like this. Could you bring along mental health workers? Could you bring along more music? Could you bring along this? And start, tapping people on the shoulder and say, have you considered those type of things?
So true. I did that because I knew we wanted people that could do graphics and things like that. So we didn't have anybody, and I was praying, and then that Sunday the Teakles arrived, and Debbie, and I'm like, oh, what do you do? And she's like, oh, I'm a graphic designer. And you're like, thank you, Jesus. And started to get to do all sorts of things. It was such a blessing.
Okay. What process will you deploy to engage your sending church and its pastors in recruiting people for a church planting team? So what did you do?
Look, I think the moral of the story, overarchingly, for you men, as you think about potentially planting, is you need to be very humble and respectful of the church you're getting sent out from. And if you're not getting sent out from them, I'd question whether you should even necessarily go. I don't think you should assume. So I think about my story. I was a pastor, and then I went to see Pete Greasley, who was my senior pastor, about moving to Australia. And he said, thanks very much, respect you, no. I was totally fine with that. I didn't struggle with that. Because to me, it's like, well, God's sovereign. And if he doesn't think that's the right thing right now, I'm comfortable. And with that, I didn't reject that at all. And I knew he was, and he did say to me, he said, but no, I will pray about it. I was really comfortable with that. Then when we moved to Australia, how did we engage the sending church? Well, again, Pete said to me, he said, look, I think yes, when he came around, you should go, but I really think it would do you a disservice to take too many young British families with you. Because I was only young, I'm only 35, and I had led all the youth and young adults ministry for 10 years. So they were quite built into me. If we had said come to Australia, we probably would have had 100 people say, I'll come, because it sounds exciting. But it would have been a bit of a disaster. And so he said, look, I don't think you should ask anybody. And I think if people want to come, we should, apart from the two families that had already previously talked about it before, the plan was go for at least 2 years, and let's see if anybody else would actually still like to come. And none of them did. None of them, it had all gone on. And I think many of them probably would have come and gone home. But the point was, I was very respectful of that. I wasn't like, well, I'm still going to ask them. And then your situation was far more, we were both involved in, okay, I want to help you raise a team as well, and then sent. And so how did that work from your sort of end?
Well, I was so grateful for Dave's warm encouragement to the church to go with Riley. We trust him, you know, we think it's going to be great. And your investment in us working as a church plant has been invaluable. And I think it goes both ways. You know, I've got to be humble and want that and work with him. And then he's also going to be humble and want that and not be threatened by people leaving, not be threatened by half the band leaving and things like that. And
Half, it was 2/3.
was it really?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
We used to have 4 drummers and we went down to 1. They took 3 for this tiny little band.
You need drums. It's very important. Okay, I think it'd be good to maybe jump in here because we're talking about gifts and who you are. The question was asked, am I number 1 or number 2 guy? And the question of how do I know if I'm called could be worth talking about a little bit here because you're saying, oh, should I go and plant a church? And your pastor says no. So, you know, that feeds into the calling bit. So why don't you talk a little bit on how do you know if I'm actually called to do all of this?
Yeah. Truth be known, I wouldn't actually as a pastor say to somebody no like that. So I think I had a very good relationship with him and it was quite blunt. I probably wouldn't say that. I'd probably be more inclined to help somebody say, hey, I don't think you're ready, or I don't think our sending church can quite cope with you going yet. Could you wait? I'd probably go more that route, so we're a bit more understanding. Why no? What was exactly the question?
How do I know if I'm called to plant a church?
I think for you guys, you're in this church, you talk to Michael and you ask him. And you say, look, if you have it on your heart to plant a church, would you help me and would you assess me and would you evaluate whether you think I've got the gifts necessary to do that? Yeah. And humble yourself. And if he says yes, then great. If he says, you know what, I think there's some things you need to strengthen, your next question is, would you help me? And if he's like, bro, I don't think so. I think you'll find it harder than you think. Because I think what you have to understand as brothers, like any job, you don't have that job yet. So you're just imagining what it would be like. But your imagination is probably not the reality of what it's like. So you need to talk to people that are actually doing it, because there's a lot more to it than it would appear. And so they're the men that should be assessing, I think, to work out, is this the right thing for you to do? And what can we work together on it?
Yeah, so there's that question in 1 Timothy 3. Anyone who desires, or not a question statement, but anyone who desires the office of an overseer has an honorable ambition. So there's that internal sense like, oh, I'd like to be a pastor or a church planter. And really, to be a church planter, you've got to be a pastor. So, one goes together. So there's an internal call, but like Dave said, no one just sends themselves in the New Testament. There's external calling and confirmation. Barnabas and
even the Apostle Paul, which is remarkable to me. The Apostle Paul has just been called by Jesus, and then he's clearly checking in with the church about whether he's going to go or not. That's just remarkable to me.
And so, I would 100% agree with what Dave said. I think lay yourself at not literally, at Michael's feet. And just say, what do you think, brother? And what would your counsel be? How can I grow? And what should I do?
Which takes real courage and real humility.
And trust in the sovereignty of God, that God will lead. And you don't have to be the master of your own future. And that comes back again to the value of humility. It's like, okay,
Sometimes as well, as the person that obviously people ask a little bit in Australia, sometimes it's more, the truth is you're trying to actually care for people. So there's that premise of, look, I don't know whether, for some people they think they could go do it, but for example, they think they could go do it, but when they preach, they can preach, but no one ever is that keen to hear them again. That's probably going to struggle for a church to be gathered around that preaching gift, because he's all right, but he's not pronounced. Or somebody wants to go plant a church, but then when you give them a blank piece of paper to even do a ministry in the church, we're going to do this project, they never really get it quite started. They don't build a team, they don't get it. They're the feedback points. So understanding what it actually takes to plant a church, that's what you're actually thinking somebody through. Some people are, I think, great, really good. I think you're a really gifted preacher, gatherer. People want to follow you. But somebody like Richie, for example, who is a very dear brother, is clearly a guy that actually, if he was sitting, he would say, I wouldn't want to do what he does. But I love sitting behind him and just trying to care for people and help people. I really feel that's a sweet spot for me. Great, do that. Don't go plant a church, do that. And so we're trying to build pastoral teams rather than just a planter doing a thing.
So that jumps into maybe, am I a number one or a number two guy? Because that will affect your church plant team and the makeup of that and whether or not you should church plant. So how do you know if you're a number one or a number two guy, and maybe what are those phrases mean? I assume you guys know what that means, a number one.
You're going to lead it, you're going to follow behind somebody else.
Yeah, you're going to be an associate or the lead pastor sort of thing.
Yeah, I think there's a few things, I think it is, but you need to get feedback on it. Is my preaching at a level where people would like to hear more? Some people, the answer is yes. Some people, it's like, maybe a bit more growth.
They can handle one in every 8 weeks, but not much.
I don't think you're quite at that sort of level where planters are often people that when you get to the end of the service and it's their first or second time preaching, the general congregation are like, man, I love that. I'd love to hear him again. Whereas sometimes people go, oh, that was really nice. Yes. Yeah, it's one of the curious things. You actually pick it a mile off by what people say at the end of the service. So when you're all standing around and having your coffee, it doesn't take long for people to go, that was really good. Particularly if you train them to be grateful and encouraging, all the rest of it. People do speak. They do that. Or another case scenario. I remember years ago when I was still at my old church, and somebody actually asked my wife, hey, who's preaching this Sunday? And she said, oh, it's this guy that was on staff with us. And they said, I'll bring my friend a different week. Well, that kind of tells you something. They're not looking to bring their unbelieving friend that week because they're like, and he was decent, but he just struggled to keep anybody's attention. It was all true, but struggled. So I think you'll be surprised if you're ever in the position of lead pastor or even a pastor, how much you'll hear from people, how much feedback you'll get. You'll find as well when you start gospel communities or life groups or midweek groups, that's when you'll find out all your data. So, because your first question is, hey, what stood out to you or encouraged you or provoked you from the Sunday message? If there's like tumbleweed, it probably hasn't landed on people. But if the group's like, man, I love that, and I really felt God met me in that, you're like, okay, we're getting some traction. So there's certain points that you tend to see. Yeah. Well, all this is just working out who's sort of that lead guy and who's the team around him. So for me, I am actually in a luxurious position where we did have 3 elders, but one got very sick, so I had to step down. But we still have 2. Brendan is also a really good preacher. So when I'm not around, he preaches, and it's great. And then we have 2 interns. So I wouldn't dream about leading by myself. But that doesn't mean we're both going to have the same gifts and both do the same things. So Brendan would say, you should be preaching way more than me. You're just gifted in that. You're a leader. I don't think in those leadership brackets do that, but I think I can do this.
Well, what you're doing as an elder is you're just gaining feedback so that you're hearing from the sheep. What do they think about people?
I mean, elder-led doesn't mean we don't listen to what people are thinking. You're still, I think people are your greatest strength. As in, that doesn't dictate what I'm going to do with it, but it definitely, usually what happens is the people confirm what you're already thinking. So as an elder, you're already thinking, I don't think I quite tracked with that. And then even on the car on the way home, hey kids, what did you get out of this morning? Yeah, Dad, it was good. I don't think I really understood what Pastor said. You're finding out stuff. So you're not letting them lead. You're leading. But they are your greatest intel of how people landing. The other side of the coin happens as well, where you hear somebody's name come up a lot. Yeah. where it'll just be like, you know what, I've been struggling, but I was speaking to Faisal just the other day, and he really helped me, and I'm just so grateful. But I'd love it if you pray with me. And you're like, oh, okay. And you note this away. And then you hear somebody's name like 5 times in 2 weeks, and you're like, hey, they're getting it done. They are actually already using their gift. And in some ways, by the time you pick somebody to be a leader, they've already picked themselves. The church is already starting to look to them. But vice versa, where somebody says, oh, I think I'm a great worship leader. But then people are pulling out the band because they're like, man, I just find him so confusing. Or you're getting intel all the time of how is this guy's actual leadership?
Does that make sense? So it's sort of like if you think about the church is a bunch of sheep, and you've got someone up there feeding them grass, and they're happy and they're stoked, and you're like, oh, okay, that guy can shepherd. But if you've got him feeding and the sheep are like, or they're going elsewhere, you're like, oh, okay, I see. People aren't following, people aren't tracking.
And some people have just a really bad view on themselves. So we had a guy in our church that came to me very quickly and said, I just want you to know, I want to be humble about it, but I'm definitely called to pastoral ministry. 100%. He'd only been like there about 4 weeks. And I'm like, oh, what makes you think that? And he said, well, my old pastor from 2 churches before had told it. And I just think I've got the gifts to do it. And I'm like, well, bro, it starts with just serving in the church. Let's just get amongst it, settle in, which he did. But after 2 or 3 years, he sent me this big, long prospectus on himself as to what he should be doing. And he was in our band, funny enough. And so I said to him, bro, I'm not sure, but I'm happy to, let's explore some of these things. So he led worship. His opening illustration, but my name is, I'm 40 years old and I'm in love with a man. And his name is Jesus. So let's sing.
And that was a week I was preaching, so I brought my friends and family along, and that was the call to worship.
Unbelievable. But he came down for the stage, thought he'd knocked it out of the park. So he would be in a meeting like what you had, and we'd be like, hey, bro, I think that did not land well. And he'd be like, really? I thought it was fine. And you're like, yeah. So lack of self-awareness, which is why we do need other people to help us. I mean, he was special. He was the same guy. Actually, he didn't lead worship much more. But I let him lead one final time. And I said, bro, I want to see what you're going to do. And okay, that sounds good. Just very toned down, just gentle. He's like, all right, I got it. I'll be fine. He gets up on the stage. Just walks there and he turns to everybody and he goes, all right, good morning, church. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you're like.
And then at the end of the set, there was just various points in the worship set where he just went at the back.
He did. And you're just like, where is he gone? He's gone.
That's church planting. Yeah.
That's church planting.
You'll just so happened I was preaching both of those weeks.
You'll get people like that. So like I said, that's an extreme example. But I think for all of us, we all have, although it's humorous, we all have more blind spots than we think. And so it does us the world of good to humble ourselves and say, hey, how would you evaluate my gifts? Do you think I can lead? Or do you think, hey, I'm not sure? Or here's some areas. If you were my class, I probably wouldn't necessarily say to you, no, I don't think you could. But I'd probably say, if you were ever going to do that, I think you'd have to strengthen in these things. And I think we should work on this. And I would be willing to say to people, hey, I'm not sure that you've got the gifts necessary, but you do seem to have the gifts necessary for this. Have you thought about this? And I'm talking about the part of the team in that. Because you get some people and they're like, they are so pastoral and so good with like mercy ministry care. And you're like, you should do that. You will totally affect our church by doing that. Sometimes people think they're pastors, but they're probably deacons as well. They're just very administrative, very helpful. And they're trying to preach, but they're struggling. And you're like, I wonder if you're actually a deacon playing a part. So we think of it as team ministry, definitely.
And you might not be the greatest charismatic leader, but you might be able to very effectively teach and preach. So you might need to build a team with people that can do it around you, can help and kind of add some of those giftings that you don't have. So any follow-up questions on any of that?
Yeah, definitely. The preacher would be a part of it. The other part of it is that sort of entrepreneurial sort of gift, as in, you seem to, and what I mean by that is you give Brian the task of, hey, really thinking through a prospectus for this area, and you read it and you think this church could really happen. Or you read it and you think that they're missing quite a lot of things. I don't think they've really got their head around it leadership-wise. So that strategy piece that's needed. I think a third piece is just sometimes even their temperament. Because as a lead pastor, you start to feel a lot of pressure to have to come up with the answers, and you've got to be okay with that and I'm able to function in that and still enjoy my life. Whereas for some people, they're like, I think that pressure will kill me. I wouldn't want that. And you have to try and create environments where they're going to feel that to see how they get on with that type of thing. I think the fourth thing would be if you give them an event to organize or anything like that with maybe not lots of help, can they get it off the ground? Do you come away from that event thinking, that was great, he managed to get 10 people roped in on this, they're all really excited about it, they're envisioned for it? That's probably the lead pastor guy. And so there are things like that: initiative, strategy, preaching gift, ability to cope with probably what's going to be quite a lot of pressure. You've also got courage and perseverance. The amount of church planters that pack in because it got really hard, I'm done. Lead pastors don't often think like that. They're like, I'm all in. I'm going to make this thing work. And I'm going to trust God, and I'm going to look for help, and I'm going to draw people in. Lead pastors often really understand, I need partnership, I need help. So could you help me? I'm not sure what to do. There's that humility at the same time as strength. So there's certain character qualities that he had when he came to us. Whereas other guys come, and they're definitely called to play a part in the team, definitely. And you will not build a good church without them. But I think they're not going to suit that. They'll find it overwhelming. They're going to suit this role. Also, in church planting, the lead pastor is often thinks very missionally. They're thinking about reaching people for Jesus. Whereas some pastors don't. They're not too worried about evangelism. They're worried about caring for this group of people that God's bringing them. That's two different gifts. Is that helpful? Yeah, all those things. The truth of it is, I know you call it number one and number two, and I get that. I would probably try and refrain from that terminology, even though it's common, because I think it does give the impression that this is the main guy, and this is a really nice helper. As a number one in that sense, I would not want anybody I work with to feel that. I'd want to know we're all number ones around here, guys. We're all elders. We've just got different roles in the team. We're just doing different things. I'm going to use my gift in a way that you're going to. But I'm not thinking, if this church doesn't have me, we're in terrible trouble. I'm thinking if this church doesn't have you, we're in terrible trouble. You've got to build that team mentality.
I mean, for me, when I did it, it was you're looking for people that are that quality. They're like that. They're all in. You're not. Because of the nature, it's like warfare. You want a crack team of people that are going in to win the objective. You don't want to be bringing along someone that's just picked up a gun and figured out how to use it. And so if you can, you're sort of looking for the people that are, if they're not all there, they're willing to go there. So number one is humility, but you're looking for people that are like, train me, teach me. I want to grow. I want to do this. I'm all in. I love Jesus. I'm all in for Christ. That my life is not my own, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm looking more for that heart, and then the rest of it is teachable. The rest of it is like, okay, we can work with this no matter who we've got. So we had a team of really good people, not necessarily the most skilled or, just a solid, good-hearted people that if I said, hey, we're doing this, they're like, let's do it 3 times. So there was that kind of mentality.
They achieved a lot in a short space of time. I mean, they are literally doing outreach events with full-on meals, and there's only 28, but it's just they're all in. Wowzers.
So because that was the type of church I was trying to create, I was looking for those type of people and trying to build those type of people, celebrate those type of people. But if you're trying to create a church like this, where you're actually not doing any events, you're just doing a Sunday, and trying to build a pastor's college, then you're going to need someone like Josh to come with you. Whereas planting my church, I might not have needed Josh to come with me because I wasn't trying to do that. I would have gladly had Josh because he's amazing. But you know what I mean? So you're looking at what am I trying to do, and will these people help me to do it? And are they great church members already? And apart from that one couple that weren't, everyone else was either a great church member or able to be, through investment. So that would be some.
If you can just find people that you look at what they're already doing in their local church and they're really good, take them. Don't bank on somebody changing. As in, they don't do anything in our church and they don't give, but they really like me and they said they're really keen. They won't change. They'll carry on being themselves within not too long. Because the novelty will go off and then they'll revert. And you're like, that can be very demotivating for a team. Because now you've got like 80% of the people in, but these 20% don't even come. And you're like, it kind of feels like a false start. So you really want people, I would say the same when we're looking for missionaries. People are like, particularly in the West, people are like, I feel called to the mission field. Okay, tell me about your local church. I don't go to one. Well, that's a conversation stopper, because they're just going to take themselves with them. So you're going to get on the mission field and try and build a church, but you're not in one now. Right. Okay. It's just very... So it's even missionaries for us. We're looking for members of churches that are actually modeling these values, that are saying, I feel called, I've got to go do it overseas. All right, let's look at that. But if they're only going to take themselves with them, so it's really important. I think that's a good category, actually.
Another category to add to that would be, are they a good team player? So a church plant team, not just skills and individuals, but are they willing to not just relate to you well, but to relate to everyone in the church plant well and go, these are my brothers, these are my sisters, this is my family, this is my group, rather than being like, well, yeah, we've got this team, but I'm sort of on my own, or I'm living my own life, or I'm too busy for them. So I was looking for a group that could become a family that we're then inviting people to join into, rather than a team of individuals who are really skilled, who don't care for one another, which is that fellowship piece again.
And we missed that. When I moved to Sydney, I missed that bit somehow. As in they were actually very passionate about the church. They were very passionate about making a difference. They weren't really team players. So 6 months in of the plant, so I've got 42 people to start off with. 6 months in, most left. And you think, well, why was that? Well, here's why. I asked 4 of the younger guys to preach because I'd already been investing time. It was all those names I mentioned before. And then instantly, we had 2 people come to me after January and say, why didn't you ask me? And they were offended that I didn't ask them. Left. Another family, when we introduced Alpha, and they're like, Alpha will never work here. It needs to be Christianity Explorer 101 Bible reading. And you're like, yeah, look, I think that they're good too, but I think we're going to go this route. Left, because they felt that I didn't listen to them. They weren't team players. They came with their own agenda and what they think is right, and they hadn't understood. So one guy, before I left, even said to me, who do you think you are? And I said, the pastor of the church, the one that's going to give an account before the Lord, and I'm called to lead. And I'm not trying to be difficult with you, but I'm actually the pastor. And they weren't used to that. And so they all left. I went from 42 to 12 in that time, and definitely felt like, have I made the biggest error of my life going to the other side of the planet with my family to build a reducing church? And I remember somebody saying to me at the end of that time, what do we need to change because all these people are leaving? And I said, well, we're going to change nothing. We're going to keep doing exactly what we're doing because we're doing the right thing. We're doing all that. And it's like, that's the type of church we're going to build. And God really started to bless it after that. It was really wonderful. But all that to say, yeah, that team player piece is really good, as in, so even asking people, I think we did when we asked people to think, as in, hey, listen, if you come on the plant and you were never asked to lead something or do something specific, would you be okay with that? We ask them that because you're trying to test them, like, because if they're like, well, yeah, I mean, I do feel cool. Okay, let's chat about that because maybe you'll come on the plant and actually not be asked to do that, and let's have that out. We got a bit smarter the second time around.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to be mindful of too, is if you plant a church and people find out about it, you'll bring out of the woodwork people who are like, great, here's an opportunity for me to have my chance to be involved. And my old pastor would never let me, but this, young person might or whatever, and they go, ha. And you've just got to be really wary of that. And you're going to offend people, but you're not trying to. But you just got to lead, say no.
Yeah, definitely. The truth is, yes, you can. And yes, we do. But what tends to happen in all the countries is, say with Michael and Josh, there's only one Michael and Josh. And if 8 out of 10 of you say we want to plant the Sovereign Grace Church, they'll be so busy with those 8, they won't have time for the other 2. Not because they're trying to be cruel or nasty. It's just a reality that you. Because if it's a bit like for me, if 100 churches came to Sovereign Grace next year and said we wanted to be planted, with all the best intentions in the world, we can't resource them all. We got to pick. And so you go with, hey, I think these are the guys that are actually with us, that have got our values. We're going to have to choose them. Not because you're trying to be cruel. It's just the reality that you can't stretch yourself so thin that it starts to get really confusing. So I think Sovereign Grace is really gospel-minded and kingdom-minded. But I think what we've learned is to do that well, we have to stay in our lane. And the more stretched out you become, the more you're like, we don't even have a lane anymore. We're just helping everybody, and I'm not even quite sure what we're doing. We're just building the kingdom. And it starts to get confusing. Rather than, you know what, I think we're going to build the kingdom by trying to plant Sovereign Grace churches. And what I mean by that, just to be clear, I'm not bothered about the name Sovereign Grace or the brand or all. But we do feel called by God to plant churches that have those. We don't have any stream other than if you happen to know the pastor that's involved with you. So if somebody was in our church, so if Riley was like, hey, I want to plant a church in Sydney, and I love you and I respect you, but it's going to be different, and I don't hold to those values, I couldn't in good heart send anybody from my church with him, because I actually think he's wrong. So it would be confusing that you're like, oh, Dave, you've taught us to be continuationist, but now you're sending us with a guy who's a cessationist. That's very confusing for people. I'm confused by that. Or you've really valued joy, but he doesn't seem very joyful. It doesn't really work. And so for integrity to it, it would be like, bro, we are for you. We're going to pray for you. We'd probably even give you some money, but we can't partner with you in the same way of getting behind you, sending people with you, sending massive finances. Hey, let's keep meeting once a month, because it's very confusing for the church then as well. It gets quite strange, particularly when there's 6 other guys that do want to plant exactly what we have here. And I can send my son to write. Oh, if my son said, Dad, I want to go join Sovereign Grace Church of Parramatta. He's a sweet kid. I'd be like, son, that's fantastic. But if it was, Dad, I want to go join this church, but they're cessationist and they're not reformed, and it's pretty much led by a man and a woman, I'd say, oh, son, I can't. You can do it, but we're on a different plane. And particularly if he's saying, oh, Dad, no, I believe what you're saying. I agree, but, maybe. I think it gives a very confusing message. And for everybody, that's been my experience. And so I think staying in our lane actually can seem to slow things down. But my experience globally is actually, in the long run, it will speed you up. Because you'll start to build really strong at the base. More people will be attracted to that. And you can multiply quicker. If you get too many inks in the ointment, so to speak, it starts to get very confusing what you even are. And so, no, we don't actually have a stream other than, God bless you. I'm going to be a fan and stay in touch.
And it would depend on the local church. So Michael might have more capacity in the early days to support something like that, but as things progress, might not. Or he might decide, I don't want to do that. And it would be up to each local pastor.
On the whole as well, to be honest.
People don't want to.
People don't want to. If somebody is like, hey, I love you guys at Sovereign Grace, but the fact that you only have males preaching really does my head in. Why do you want to relate to us? People don't want to relate to us in that sense. They respect it, but they're not trying to.
There's no money stream coming out to people that aren't planting Sovereign Grace churches. Like the finances, the funding, the support, well, it's for the family in that respect. And it's not that we're against people. It's just that you've only got finite, so you're going to give to what you're doing. But each individual local church might do something. So if there was a church plant that rose up from within me that was, say, Congregationalist, I might be like, all right, we bless you guys. We're going to give you 50 grand, or we're going to give you whatever, and whatever we have, or, whatever it is, and just go, let's go for it. But we're not going to, it's going to be different.